Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's workshop. Thank you again for joining. I'm delighted to have all of you here. My name is Elijah Marquez, and I'm the Community Education Manager at Mission Hospice and Home Care. Mission Hospice is an independent nonprofit hospice that's been serving the San Francisco Peninsula and South Bay area for over 40 years. At Mission Hospice, we believe that everyone in the last phase of their lives deserves care that is aligned with their beliefs, values, and wishes. We are committed to providing compassionate and personalized education, such as today's program, transitions, palliative, and hospice care to all members of our community. For those of you who are curious to learn more, you can visit us at missionhospice.org. Today's program is being recorded and will be shared by means of our YouTube channel for those of you who are interested in rewatching it. Our workshop presenter, Dana, will be asking for your experiences, comments, questions throughout the program. So feel free, if you don't want to be in the recording, to put any of your responses in the chat and I will happily read them aloud. If you'd like to unmute yourself and respond, we entirely welcome that as well. And feel free to leave your camera on or off, whatever you're most comfortable with. It's my pleasure to introduce our program facilitator and author of the Condolences Pocket Guide, What to Say and Not to Say to Grievers. Dana, if you can give us a little wave. There you go, she's joining me on screen. Dana founded the Be a Bridges project to help ease conversations with people who are sad about anything by encouraging and educating their family, friends, and peers on saying helpful condolences. So you can visit her website and learn more at beabridgecondolences.com, which I'll stick in the chat as soon as I'm done talking. This is Dana's third and final session this month with Mission Hospice on saying helpful condolences. The first two sessions are recorded. So again, you could go on Mission Hospice YouTube channel and watch those two recordings, and this one will be up there soon. So feel free to rewatch to spread to friends and family who this might benefit. And with all of that said, without further ado, I'll turn the stage over to Dana.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Elijah. And I'm so happy to be here because I get to be in my favorite type of conversation with you, which is a conversation about compassion and condolences. And as Elijah said, we're going to look at how deep listening helps console, especially misunderstood losses, but all losses. And we're going to look at, well, what is deep listening and how is it different than our normal listening style? And why is it essential to supporting friends or colleagues who are sad as they navigate grief? And then we're going to go into an experiential segment on practicing the 3 steps for deep listening. And then we'll open it up to Q&A. And there will be a section on how to identify misunderstood losses and why it's important to reach out, even if you feel like you've discovered way late, oh my gosh, this person has been right in front of me grieving a loss. Why it's important to reach out the moment you figure it out. It's never too late to offer a meaningful condolence. So, some of the things that you're going to come away with today is that everyone can learn to make a profound difference in a hurting person's life. And you might even learn to feel comfortable moving toward those scary but meaningful conversations that involve sadness and grief. And that this will bring a greater sense of meaning, both to we as the friends and family of the grievers and to the grievers themselves. And it forges deep, meaningful bonds that last a lifetime. And that's why I say it doesn't matter how long it's been since the loss, as soon as you know, reach out, because your kindness and thoughtfulness and empathy will be remembered always. And the last thing that people are going to learn today, or I hope you come away with, and my plan is that it's one of the ways that we can connect on a meaningful level, there's many ways, but one is through supporting someone in grief. And in this time of deep divisions, learning to make these difficult connections is how we stay connected with each other, and learning how to be empathetic with people is how, even if we have this tendency like, oh my God, that's just so hard, when we move toward that situation, it helps change the world conversation by conversation. So for me, it's a big deal. And it's meaningful, the connections that we make. All right, so let's get started with a little background about me and how I came to study condolences for 20 years. Oh, by the way, I'm going to summarize everything at the end in the chat. So if you are worried about missing something, or it's going to be in the chat. So back in the year 2000, my husband and I lost our infant daughter, Zoe. And then 7 months later, my dad died. And then a year after that, we lost our toddler son, Jake. And it was so painful. It really drew a line in the sand, life before and after those losses. But what was so surprising to both my husband and I was what our dear, caring, highly intelligent friends said to us in the form of condolences. There were so many of them that were painful that actually made us feel worse. And I know they didn't know. And I know that they were struggling to know what to say and do and how to help us. And we needed their help. And back then I was wishing that I had a little pamphlet or a little book that would explain what I needed when I couldn't explain anything to anyone. And I was talking to a girlfriend about this, saying, you know, if I had a little book, I could say to my friends, I know you care, but right now I can't explain what I need. So here's a book that explains it all. And I think it'll help us get through this together. So I was telling a girlfriend about this, and in the middle of that, I realized, well, wait a minute, I make my living as a writer. I'm going to write this book. And so a couple of years later, when I'd recovered some, I began. I interviewed hundreds of people, both on the grieving side and on the friends and family side. And 20 years later, I published that book, which is this one, called Condolences Pocket Guide, What to Say and Not to Say to Grievers. And I spent an extra year making this small and as a guidebook instead of the longer book, like memoir style book, because I want this to fit into a pocket or a purse or into a church hymnal or a pamphlet, a folder, someplace where people can open to any page and they can get, you know, the thumbs up or thumbs down help, the sayings, the pull quotes I have there. At the end, I have, if all anyone does is look at the lists at the back for the list of unhelpful condolences and the list of helpful condolences, well, the world's going to be a kinder, gentler place. So after publishing the book, I realized that it's actually the beginning of a larger need to help people who are facing any kind of loss, actually to help their friends and family. So I founded the Be a Bridge Condolences Project, and my deepest wish is that through this book and my website, that no griever will ever suffer from the well-meaning, truly well-meaning, but pat condolences that actually do harm instead of good. And that friends and family will have the confidence to know that they can make a meaningful difference, and that they will feel like, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and try and reach out anyway. Because I had friends that didn't reach out, that I never heard from. And I know it's because they didn't know what to do, but it still really hurt. And I know that happens a lot. I've done it. I've either delayed or just not reached out. And it's, we're wired as human beings to avoid pain. And that's one of the ways that we end up doing it. So let's get into deep listening. And to start it off, has anyone ever been listening to someone talk about something painful, at home or on the phone or at work? They're sharing about something, and you notice your mind is racing about what you should say or what you should do or how you should act. Anyone here ever found themselves in that position? Yeah, a few people. Yeah. So that's where deep listening, that I'm going to have 3 steps to deep listening. And that's where that's the amygdala, the fight or flight fear part of our brain in the back, the most ancient part of our brain that has no interest in logic. And so deep listening is a skill that kind of circumvents that part of our brain. So it doesn't know we're saying, hush now, that's not your time. But let's look at why it's so meaningful to grievers. So if we look at what grieving people need, in all the interviews I did, there were some common themes. And one was they need to feel accepted, because they feel ugly and unlovable about how much they're crying, how sad they are, what a downer they are. And they're really sensitive as a result of this to being corrected or advised, or someone hijacking the conversation to tell them about their story. Because when any of those things happen, the takeaway most grievers had was, oh, well, that person isn't interested, or they don't like the way I'm grieving, or I'm a bummer, or it just fed into their existing fears. Because remember, if we happen to live in one of the few cultures on this planet where when someone is sad, if we did live in this culture where if someone were sad and started to cry, even if we didn't know them, even if it was in a public place, we knew it was our job to rush over and start crying with them and mourning with them. What a different place it would be for people grieving. But that's not the culture we live in. That's not the culture that most countries on this planet have. And so we can get an understanding of how grievers are being squished or compressed by our social conventions. And so they need our help in feeling like they're doing their grief right, and feeling like they are okay, even in their worst moments. And deep listening is one of the several things that will show them that. So if they can feel that they're being accepted by us, then they're going to quit fighting their own process, and they're going to accept their own process and start to share and release their pain. And this is the counterintuitive bit. Who here, when you're around someone who's grieving, feels like, oh my God, I got to do something. It's my job as a friend to show them that I care, to actually offer some help that will change this, like now. Has anyone felt this way? Like we've got to pep them up or tell them that there's a few people who have had this. Well, this is the counterintuitive bit about deep listening, is that we need to turn our focus off of the griever and back toward ourselves. And that feels like, well, wait a minute, we're here for them. Why would I be all on myself? Well, it's because they need our vulnerability, because their social protections have been stripped away by their loss. We have protections that keep us from feeling the fact that we can die at any moment. Who could get anything done if that was like always like right in front of your face? So we have social protections that help us kind of mitigate that and skirt around it. So that's why we say, hey, how's it going? Great, it's all good, even when it's not, because that's what we've agreed we do. And grievers have had those protections taken off. I couldn't say I'm fine, even though I knew that was the right thing to do. I couldn't do it because I so wasn't fine. I mean, the best I could ever come up with was okay. So they need our vulnerability because their protections have been stripped away and they're completely vulnerable. And they see that we're not, that we still have our protections up. And deep listening is a form of vulnerability. It's really dropping everything and all our preconceived notions about what we should be doing and just being with empathy. So if we're going to help them when they're talking, it's their cue to us that we need to let them speak. When they're silent, it's their cue to us that we need to let them be silent, to not talk about it right now or with us, whatever it is. They choose their time and their place and with whom they feel comfortable, and we need to accept it. And it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. So let's look at the types of listening that we do. The first it's known as selective listening. And there's many types, but I'm going to go over 3. And one is selective because these are the most common. Selective listening is when we're listening for one thing. And when you're in a business meeting or trying to get some information, that's appropriate for selective listening, but not when we're trying to be of some meaningful service to someone who needs to unburden themselves in our presence. And usually in our nervousness, actually it's our unexamined nervousness, that we end up doing some version of selective listening. We're either waiting for our turn to say something, or we're waiting for an opportunity to prove how well we're listening. And how do we prove that? By talking about ourselves. And not only that, sometimes we end up cutting them off to tell them how well we're listening. I call this hijacking. I have a blog on hijacking conversations on my website if you want more on this. So if we've hijacked their conversation, then one of their essential tools for overcoming or moving through their pain has been removed. Because this very thing that we often say, you've just got to move on. Again, with the counterintuitive, the way we move on is doing the very thing that most of us call being stuck in the past. And moving on for a griever is accomplished by doing what our culture doesn't like, being stuck in the past. And so the way grievers actually do move on is when they feel respected by the listener enough to say their piece completely until they've had their say completely, which is being in the presence of someone who's listening deeply. So the second type of listening we're going to go through is called active listening. And this is something that is used in it's where we verbally give feedback, like I'm hearing you say you're feeling sad and angry, or I hear that you feel dismissed when, etc. And it's a great tool. It's useful in negotiations. It's useful in difficult conversations. My husband and I used to use it when we were going to talk about something that we knew was pretty charged, because you can see where your mistakes in listening are. Because someone tells you, well, that's not really what I was saying. I was saying this. And so you get to learn where you're not listening. But a griever can't advocate for themselves. They can't say, you're not hearing me. That's not what I'm saying. Could you please just let me speak? Please don't interrupt me. They can't say any of those things. And it was very common that that's the moment when they shut down and try and extricate them from the conversation as fast as possible, because they've decided that we are not a safe person to talk to. And there's no second chances with grief. I mean, there are definitely. If I were to come and apologize and say, I wasn't being a good listener and I'm so sorry, I now realize my mistake and I would really want to hear what you have to say, then yeah. But if we just leave it and they say, I got to go, thanks so much, and take off, you are never going to hear from that person again. They've lost their trust in us as friends and family. And it's not fair, but there's nothing fair about grieving. And that's where the social conventions, we can come back to that, because in polite or conversational interactions, we are allowed to make mistakes, and we kind of give people some space, and we cut them some slack for like, oh God, here they go with the advice again. And then you can just pick it up and go, well, anyway, what I was saying was, but when you're grieving, most people I talked to said that they couldn't defend themselves in any way against anything, not even the slightest possible thing. I couldn't even tell people who asked me probing questions, I don't want to talk about that. To me, it was too risky. I already felt like a terrible person and a terrible friend. I couldn't risk you saying something annoyed to me. And that's the case for people when they're deep in grief. So now let's go on to deep listening. So deep listening is when we come from an empathetic place, which is different than sympathy. Empathy and sympathy are different. Empathy is understanding and acceptance. Sympathy can be condescending and kind of one-upsmanship. It's the difference between saying, oh, that poor thing, boy, is she in a tough row, and I feel sorry for her. Or, oh my goodness, I can't even imagine how incredibly difficult that is for you. So the latter is empathy and the former was sympathy. So why is deep listening so powerful besides the bit of acceptance and besides their need to unburden themselves? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, studies have looked into the impact of listening deeply. And when people are being listened to, or when we are doing the listening, we're generating a field of acceptance that's tangible, that's noticeable. Studies, for example, have shown that we know when we're being watched. Has anyone been somewhere and you know someone's watching you, and maybe later on you were confirmed that someone was there and they saw you, but they just couldn't reach you? That's the same thing, that we know when we're being accepted by the listener, or when we're being hurried or judged or listened to with impatience, or only half listening, or, as we mentioned earlier, waiting to have our turn. And waiting is not listening. So, and that brings us to the second reason it's so powerful. The first being it's tangible, it's noticeable. There is no doubt, to someone who's had all their social protections stripped off, it's even more clear than it is to the rest of us. So the second reason is deep listening establishes a connection, so that the person who's grieving knows they're not alone in their pain. And they can have a release of crying or venting their anger or expressing their sadness or whatever they need. And this release happens into a field of acceptance. And so when we, in this practice we're going to do today, we're going to generate that field of acceptance. And there's 3 simple steps to doing it. And anyone can do it. We just need to know, 1, that it's needed, and 2, how to do it. So when we allow someone to release into that field of acceptance, we're giving them the space to stick with their own process long enough until they're done. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm talking about something that's bothering me, I get this sense that I have to hurry up and finish because I've taken more time than is socially acceptable. But if someone is sending me deep acceptance, I know I can go until I'm done. And that gives me ease. And it also gives me the courage that if they can listen to me, then I can get through this grieving. So before we do the 3 steps to deep listening, let's go over what they are. So the first is to turn away from, imagine you're with your friend who is grieving. Pick a situation where you know you weren't listening well, or one that you have coming up that you know you need to talk to someone who's hurt or angry about something, and you're afraid that you won't be able to listen. So turn your attention. Step 1 is to turn our attention away from them and onto ourselves, which is counterintuitive because we're supposed to be there for them, right? Well, we can't be there for them if we're not there for ourselves. So once we've got our attention on ourselves, we're going to turn with curiosity. This is all going to be in the chat, so no need to take notes if you don't want to. Step 2 is to have curiosity and kindness toward our own discomfort. And step 3, once we've established that, is to turn back to the griever with this same kind curiosity. And there's another word for kind curiosity. It's called acceptance. And from there, we can listen deeply. So, who's ready to practice these steps together? Because it's in the practice that we get to learn, we get to actually do the deep listening, and it allows us to come away with a sense of confidence that we could do this again in another place with another person. All right, So we're going to go through this experiential process where you're going to notice a tiny shift that allows you to make a difference. So I'm going to repeat all these things at the end, and we're going to do the experiential thing right now. So let's everyone get comfortable in your chair. And and if you feel comfortable where you are, to close your eyes and take a deep breath. And just settle into yourself in the way that you may know how to ground yourself. Some people put a hand on their heart. Some people breathe down into their torso and into their legs and into the earth. And let's get settled. Take a deep breath into where you are now. And think about the person or situation that you either have had already or are looking at having in the future. And notice your mind might be racing, you might have a bunch of questions, or your urge, almost overwhelming urge, to say something to fix whatever they're going through. Like, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing when someone's sad? So now that our focus is on ourselves, let's have some kind curiosity toward our own discomfort. Just see it. No need to fix it. It's in the seeing that we actually make space for ourselves, all of us, not just the parts that we esteem and like, but the parts that we may have trouble accepting. Maybe treat these ideas or racing mind or critical stance or need to give advice in the same way that we might take an elderly aunt or uncle or relative with us for the day. You know, we're glad to do it, but it might be kind of hard because we don't know what they need and they move so slowly and we're not used to it. So we're going to take these things that we have struggled with. Maybe some people might want to put it in a little bag and sling it over your shoulder to take with you in this conversation, because we're not trying to suppress our fears and concerns. We're allowing them. And this allowing is acceptance. And now, with your kind acceptance of your busy racing mind or your discomfort, turn your attention back to that situation, that person, place in the past or in the future, and see how you might listen differently from this place of acceptance. What do you notice? And when you feel ready, come back into your room, into your chair, into your body, into this present moment, and open your eyes. And would anyone like to share what they noticed in their shift, if they had a shift, and what it was like, and what it helped you to see. But my mom's live-in caregiver had an emergency appendectomy, and she was here during her recovery. And in the beginning, we were all concerned about making sure that, she had everything she needed. But she's a very independent person, and really was feeling like she had it going for her, going on. She had what she needed. And a couple weeks later, my mom and she were rushing to get my mom to a doctor's appointment. And I asked the caregiver, would you mind putting mom's shoes on while I go get the car because we're running late? And she said, no, I can't do that. I was so stunned. Here's this person who takes 3-hour walks. And I said, why? And she said, well, because of the surgery. And it's like I had completely forgotten because she was there. She looked normal. She didn't have any extra needs that she was announcing. And so I said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And what I realized was that I hadn't seen someone hurting right in front of me. And so later on, after the doctor's appointment, I asked her how she was doing. And she said she'd been kind of depressed about how long it takes to recover. And she got to have a conversation with me, and I got to have a conversation with her. And we felt this connection, the kind of thing that Wendy was talking about with her brother. You can't ever tell what kind of connections that you can have or lose through being able to listen deeply or not. And so, yeah, thank you. Anyone else like to share an experience that they had? Yeah, go for it. You have to unmute yourself.
Hi, sorry about the no picture. I wasn't really ready to be seen, but I wanted to speak. I have an old friend who has end stage cancer. We're in other parts of the country. We talk on the phone. So this isn't condolence for grief, but this is somebody, being present with them while they're approaching it. And what I've found in our phone calls over the last year or so, especially, is I'm willing to listen, but it's kind of, she turns it to me. How are you? How's your mother? How's your job? And so I think, well, maybe she thinks so much about herself and her problems, she'd like to think about something else for a minute. And she asked, so I answer, hoping that we can then bring it back to her. But then she'll be, someone will show up, or she'll say she's tired or in pain, and we lose it. And then I feel like I really wasn't there for her the way I wanted to be. I mean, I called, she knows I care, but had trouble making that transition.
Well, thank you. You've brought up so many good points. The first one is that people grieve many things besides death. Having a life-altering medical diagnosis is a loss. The life that you've had and assumed you would have is gone. And so it is grief. And second, sometimes that's part of listening. If someone says, how are you? And keeps asking you questions, like griever says that's their signal that they just want to have a light social conversation. When I was grieving, I craved that so much, but my friends would never let me do it because they were always at me with questions, with advice. And as soon as the advice turned on, I was out of there. And so the few moments where they'd ask me, how you're doing, Dana? I'd go, fine, how are you doing? How's your kid? And or how's your job going? And they would take that and run with it. It was deeply meaningful to me that I didn't have to be with my grief, that I got to be a normal person for 5 minutes. And that was the only 5 minutes of the day I got to be a normal person, because you know darn well, as soon as I hung up, I burst out crying because my grief would have been building up. So I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Michelle, I'm sorry, I'll have to figure out how to change that. I don't know how that number got in there.
Thank you so much, because I hope that you can feel good for what you're doing, because if she wanted to talk about her grief, she'd be talking about it. So thank you for that.
I guess I figured that, but I appreciate your affirmation, because I knew that I was just the reaching out helped, and I would always let her know, call me anytime, text me, whatever. But I'm glad to know that that was okay. I had a loss many years ago. My brother passed, and I remember being invited to have my husband at the time and I were invited to home of friends for dinner. And they were close enough that I thought, okay, I can do this. I can just be, it doesn't have to be, I don't have to be vivacious or entertaining. I can just be with them. And they had invited another couple that we didn't know. And they were all very nice and they knew the situation, but it annoyed me because I just wanted to be with it. And I didn't want to have to ignore it. I understand what you're saying. And I think there are times when I did want to lighten up, and I can see my friend might have, but I just thought about that time when I was annoyed that they didn't give me that option.
Yeah. Yeah. Elijah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing that. It definitely brought up for me. You said that you just wanted to be, and I think part of being in conversation with somebody when you're grieving or when you're sad is it's okay to just be, even if you're not talking about it. So you were saying that you are there for your friend, you're calling your friend, and they are continuing to steer the conversation away from how they're doing, but just simply by being there, being present in their life, you are making an impact, and maybe they just need your presence and not necessarily your words around their own experience. And then Dana, that brought up, anytime I talk to you, I always think of experiences that I have gone through. And for me, we have a yearly motorcycle ride for my brother in memory of his passing. So we've been doing that for about 13 years now. And on that day, I honestly rarely ever speak to how I'm feeling, but just having my friends and my family there, just being present with me through the experience without sharing words is just as impactful as having those conversations, if not more, if that's what you need in the moment. Thank you again for bringing that up.
Thank you, Elijah. That's really meaningful. Is
The
there
last I just wanted one quick thing to wrap up. The last time I spoke with my friend, she was really going downhill, not doing well, but some people showed up and we had to go, and I left it. I asked her to just envision me sitting next to her, holding her hand, not even talking. And that seemed to help. That got I felt a warm response from her. So I hope that's what I left her with.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. All right, so that was on deep listening, and I've paired it with misunderstood losses because it's so often in the not listening without judgment that people feel misunderstood. So even if their loss is of a type that we understand, someone dies, someone has a life-altering or a terminal illness, they can still end up feeling misunderstood by their support system. So let's talk about losses that might be right in front of us that we haven't seen as losses. Has anyone ever anyone here ever realized way late that someone in your life was hurting about something silently and that you completely missed it? It's not that you didn't see them because they were in your life. It's that you misunderstood the nature or profoundness of their loss. Has anyone ever been in that situation? Yeah. So I can give you an example. When I was a teenager, my the phone rang and it was for my dad. And when he hung up the phone, he goes, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea." It turns out that one of the enlisted men in the airplane that got shot down over Italy, that he was piloting, his wife had called to say that this enlisted man had died. And before he died, he said to make sure to call him. They hadn't spoken in 30 years. And my dad was so upset because he didn't know what he meant to that guy. And he was almost angry about it. And it was such a missed opportunity. And back in that day, there was no such thing as PTSD or trauma from war. You just buckled under and you dealt with it like a man. And so it was a missed opportunity that was right in front of him. Here's this guy that he went through a profoundly life-altering experience with, and they cared deeply, but they didn't know to reach out to each other. Neither one of them did. And it was so great that the wife called, so my dad got to learn what this man had thought of him. But I felt that my dad felt like he hadn't done right by this guy that he knew. And so these losses can be missed opportunities, missed friendships, missed connections. And that happens when we don't understand the nature of the deep feeling. So let's talk about some losses that go misunderstood. Anyone want? I'll start us off, and anyone can pitch in either in the chat or or by unmuting yourself and say what you think of a child or a friend or family member that dies of a drug overdose or from suicide. People tend to focus on, oh, well, you knew he was an addict, and implicit in that is you should have known that this could happen, or, well, they wanted to go, but so it's sad, but that's what they wanted. Yeah, Maria, would you like to say something?
Hi, I'm sorry, I was trying to unmute. As I was listening to you, the beautiful explanation that you gave, it reminded me of my missed opportunity when my husband lost his job of 22 years. And he lost his job, and he was doing, in front of us, he was doing really well, and he didn't really demonstrate his grief over the loss of this job that meant so much to him. He said later to me, I was trying so hard to be brave because I didn't want to worry you. And I was in the middle of taking care of my aunt who had advanced dementia, and she was dying from dementia. And so he said, you had so much going on with your job and your aunt, and I just didn't want to worry you. So he managed to hide his grief for a long time. And he didn't share with me until, and I kept asking him, I kept saying, checking in, are you okay? How are you doing? But then I tried really hard not to ask him about any details about his job search, right? But I felt like that was such a profound, for a social worker, for me to just miss it. So I was so caught up with my own stuff that's just like one example that sometimes we just overlook, right? The loss of something that gave us so much meaning for so long. and then his struggle to find something new. So that's just a quick one. And another one was for him to miss the fact that I worked with a physician who died by suicide, and it was very sudden and it was at work. And so I just had this profound grief. And I had worked with him for 28 years. I wasn't currently working with him because I had moved to a different unit, but I loved him. And I saw him grow up. He was an intern who grew up to be a chief of a unit. And so my husband finally asked me, "Why are you so sad?" And I said, because I just kept crying at different episodes, right? As I was relaying the story. And I finally said, because I loved him. I admired him, and he meant so much to so many people. And he just hugged me and said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how much he meant to you." So those are just two missed opportunities, mine and his.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and for so many men in our culture who are trained to be providers, losing a job can be one of the worst things that happens to them. So thank you for that. Anyone else like to share? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'll go ahead and share. Sounds like there's a few of us in this Zoom room that have lost siblings. And I feel like sibling loss is one of those misunderstood losses, different from these other kinds of losses we're talking about. But I think the profoundness of a sibling loss is often just overlooked. And my brother died 20 years ago, and I was 27 at the time. And people would say to me, "Oh, well, you have your husband, or you have, your poor parents," or they would focus on my sister-in-law and basically literally tell me I was okay because, it wasn't my son and it wasn't my spouse. I did later lose my spouse, but that's a different story. But I think sibling loss is really just not the depth of loss, the person who's supposed to be your longest relationship throughout your life. I don't think people who have not gone through it understand how profound that loss is.
Right. Yeah, that is such a good point. We can skip over the person right in front of us and say, "Oh, how's your mother dealing?" I learned this from Elijah, who said that's such a common thing. "How's your mom doing?" Well, it's like, what am I, chopped liver? And when my husband was sick, people would come rushing at long-term illness. People would say, come right up to me and go, "How's Scotty?" And after a while, I was just like, what am I, chopped liver? And then when I had a long-term illness, because he was a guy and not considered, women are considered capable of handling the household, but men are considered that they aren't, neither of which is true under every circumstance. People came rushing in to help him in ways they didn't come rushing in to help me. And so caregiver wives get a lot of short shrift with the support system that caregiver husbands do not get. I can think of, Maria, yes, you had something else, or is your hand still up from the last one?
I'm sorry. I think I just forgot to take it down.
Oh.
My apologies.
No worries.
Let me figure out how to do this. Lower my hand.
There's some other misunderstood losses. What about bankruptcy or infertility or lung cancer? Yeah, Wendy, did you have something?
I'm just thinking that all of us have experienced so many invisible losses. And it sounds to me like time will present it to you. So maybe it's about timing. I don't know if that's really a question, or, like if you have an invisible loss that you don't realize, and then later you do, is there a bridge or something? I don't know how to pose the question properly.
I think there's two sides to it. So we're talking about not our own losses, but being unaware of someone else's loss. And or not seeing it as something that you should really even make a big deal about. Like so often we can hear with miscarriage, or well, you can get pregnant again. And what someone said to me when we lost our daughter is, oh, you can have another baby. And it's so these are ways that we all, and I have said, what did I do? What did I say to an acquaintance who I learned he had lung cancer? I said, oh, were you a smoker? Oh yeah, so he deserves to die. And I was just like, how did that come out of my mouth? This is after I've written this book. So
You're human.
I realized, if you could, I realized that the fight or flight mechanism is so strong that if we go unconscious, stuff like that's going to pop out. And so I immediately apologized and said, I am so sorry. I can't believe I even said that. I have a ton of friends who smoke and they don't have cancer. I just want to let you know, I'm sorry that you do. So another one is a disgruntled. Anyway, I hope, Wendy, that answers your question. So another one is a disgruntled employee. People who are unhappy about getting passed over for a promotion or being treated poorly in their view, they're grieving the loss and expectation that isn't being met is a loss. And this doesn't mean that we have to go around looking and sniffing out every possible loss. We're talking about people that we have relationships with who we might be missing some element of their life that's right in front of us. So when we lost our daughter and our son to failed adoptions, we didn't lose them to death. And so as soon as I tell people that, I can see this little shift like, well, wait a minute, that's not a death. Or, well, why I shouldn't be so upset then, because this isn't as bad as being pregnant and losing a baby, as adopting, and, all kinds of backpedaling ways, or you can adopt another baby, or you must have known this could have happened. And these are ways, and I'm wondering here if anyone felt that way just now. Like, oh, I thought her children died. Well, what does this mean exactly? If it's completely natural that we have these feelings, it's nothing to be ashamed of because we're wired this way. The amygdala is going to protect us from too much pain. It's that it's when we go unconscious about it and we act on it that causes suffering for others. So was there anyone here who had a slight, oh my God, I have to do a reset here when I revealed that? Because it's a change in our perspective, and we can do those 3 steps like, oh, let's look at that reaction with our eyes open. You don't have to go into that, close your eyes, but anyone realize that and was able to turn within and go, oh, wow, look, I'm feeling like I don't want to extend her as much empathy as before, or whatever it might be. And then you are able to befriend that feeling and come around to a different response. Would anyone like to share? Yeah, Wendy.
What struck me is death is the death that happens to all of your expectations. You were going to raise these children, and now they're gone. That is a death. Whether they physically died, when something is severed like that, and there is nothing you can do and no recourse, that to me, that's death.
Yes, thank you. That it is.
It's another thing that we have a death of. We have deaths in many ways, I believe.
That's totally true.
Yeah, so thanks for sharing that.
And
Thank you.
thanks, Wendy.
Me, sorry. Not speaking directly to what you said about our reaction to what you said, but when I got divorced, my husband informed me one day that he had fallen in love with someone else. Sorry, gotta go. And I understand there are two people in a marriage. And I knew someone else whose husband had passed a while earlier. And the outpouring for the person whose husband had died was, of course, appropriate and wonderful and that, but she was lovingly ensconced by his family and the whole social circle, and heartbroken that the love of her life and their beautiful marriage had ended. And I do feel for her. I was committed for my life. I didn't have much family of my own, but I was very much part of his family. And all of a sudden I was replaced in that family. And I had the rejection of that she did not have. And I understand death is traumatic, and I don't mean to take away from her, but I felt like I lost family. I lost a lot of my sense of self. And you can say in the bigger picture, in the long run, it's probably good that I was able to rebuild that for myself. But just saying, this is the different kind of death and grieving, and people's reactions and perceptions can get complicated on these things.
I think you're absolutely right about that, because the loss is hardly different, and it was very poignant to see someone who is taken into the bosom of the family for her loss, while you are not being taken into the bosom of the family with your loss. And I can relate to that so much, because if my child had died and there had been a gravestone, I would have been surrounded by friends and family. And because that didn't happen, it was dismissed like, well, adopt another baby. And so I totally understand, and that is such a good example of two people suffering just about the same loss and being treated differently. There's a word for that. When we lose our support system, we suffer a second loss, which is the loss of the support system we need and thought we would have. And it's called disenfranchised loss or disenfranchised grief. And we are literally now grieving two things instead of just the one. So thank you for that. Does anyone else have an example?
Dana, we do have quite a few comments that have come in.
Great.
So I will summarize all of them, but some of them are saying that the matter of death has been a part of, it could be an invisible loss, it could be a misunderstood loss. One such example was somebody who dies as a result of COVID and wasn't vaccinated. We've also had people share that miscarriages are quite a misunderstood loss, and the lacking support around that.
Yep.
Suicides as well, and loss of relationships with the person who is still living.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, because in the latter, the loss of the relationship, it's the loss of the expectation. I have a friend who lost a 5-year relationship, and she was looking at having children and being a wife and a mother, and it's gone. So there's all those things that go with it. As Wendy said, it's the death of an expectation. And my daughter I had for 13 days. And I'd already imagined walking her down the aisle in her wedding. I didn't even know I had imagined that until she was gone. And then I was losing that too. So, yeah. So before we open this up, these comments are amazing. And I'm so grateful for what people are sharing. before we move into the open Q&A, I'd like to leave you with a few thoughts. And one is, my deepest wish is that through workshops like these and having my little book in churches and mortuaries and flower shops and bookstores and getting it out to the widest possible audience, that we will bit by bit, conversation by conversation, start connecting to each other across the whole planet with kind curiosity and empathy, and that we are changing the world when we do that, tiny step by tiny step. I deliberately kept this small and inexpensive, and plus you're never going to get rich on books. But I hope that this book can get out to as many people as possible, because I really want to help prevent that anyone who's grieving suffer PAC condolences. And I go into PAC condolences in the first of this 3-part series, and it's also in the book and it's on the website. So that's my deepest wish. And thank you for entering into this conversation where we are changing it right here. So I'd love to take anyone's questions or comments.
And what I will do is turn off the recording so that in these last couple of moments, we have some private space for sharing. So I wanted to say before we stop the recording, thank you so much for everyone who shared, who is vulnerable in this space and shared, the grief they're experiencing, and also how they've worked and supported others in their lives, whether it's the correct way or, a way that you want to work on a little bit more. I think every time we come to something like this, we get a little bit better at supporting those around us. So with that, give me just a moment to turn the recording off.